The Klamath River drains 16,000 square miles of watershed lands. It's 263 miles long, traveling through 2 states at a rate of 17,000 cubic feet per second. It's the second largest river in California after the Sacramento River. Many indigenous tribes live along the river, including the Yurok, the Karok, the Hupa, the Shasta, and the 3 Klamath tribes, the Klamath, Modoc, and Yahootskan tribes. 6 dams interrupt the river's flow. Salmon populations are down 90% from their historic levels. 4 of the dams are scheduled to be demolished in 2020. If it happens, it will be the largest dam removal project ever in our history. I want to see the river before, so I can understand better what happens after. This is the starting point on my journey up the dammed river. Logs and debris from our upstream tree cutting are scattered on the beaches at the mouth of the river, floating in the water along with the seals and birds swimming and diving, feeding on the river's bounty. The logs remind me of the impact of our industrial way of life on the natural world, and I wonder, what will it take for us to loosen our grip on nature and live with it instead of dominating it? The first dam is 200 miles upstream. 200 miles of majestic forest-covered mountains. Driving along these 200 miles, I can see that the dams are not the only problem the river and salmon face. In some places, the rocky shores of the river are covered with a fine white powdery silt, most likely coming from mining and farming discharges into the river. The water is clear in places and not in others. Algae grows along the banks, reflecting the high nitrogen content of farm and urban runoff and elevated temperatures of reduced water flows. 100 miles in, I turn up Scott River Road and travel along the Scott River. The tribes and environmentalists have been in conflict with farmers over excessive diversions of water from the river. At first, beautiful forests covering dramatic mountains rise up from the clear running stream. But then burned-over hillsides loom up on the horizon again and again, reflecting the long years of drought we are passing through. Logging trucks carrying charred logs drive by. The steep mountains give way to open meadows briefly until hay-growing farms come into view. Before last winter's rains, the Scott River almost dried out from farmers pumping out well water for their extensive crop irrigation. The farmers' widespread use of petrochemical fertilizers and pesticides impacts the river and all life in the watershed. The west side of Mount Shasta looms up in the distance, watching over the valley. Moving north of Mount Shasta, the forests give way to rolling hills, grasslands, and oaks. In contrast to the path that most other rivers take, the Klamath River flows first through rolling hills and valleys, then through the coastal range mountains to the sea. Iron Gate is the first dam I meet on my upstream travels. Built in 1964, the earth-filled dam has a hydroelectric plant on the right side and a spillway on the left. Downstream a bit is a fish hatchery. Iron Gate is the end of the river for migrating salmon coming upstream from the ocean. The fish hatchery did nothing to prevent the disaster inflicted upon the fish. Along the northeast edge of the Iron Gate Reservoir, I pass meadows and power lines. The river stagnates in the reservoir, drops its silt, and warms up in the lake. Toxic algae blooms keep everyone out of the water. At the east end of the reservoir sits a hydroelectric power plant, powered by water from the upstream Copco No. 2 diversion dam opened in 1922. The power plant is fed by two huge pipes that emerge from a tunnel on a hill high above the generators. Copco No. 2 diverts most of the Klamath River from its natural stream into open concrete channels and tunnels, no longer interacting with the ground and the living creatures that inhabit the stream bed. The diverted water no longer nourishes life on the river. A short distance upstream from Copco 2 is Copco 1, opened in 1916, the oldest dam on the river. Copco stands for California-Oregon Power Company, the predecessor of Pacific Corp, the current owners. Along the Copco Reservoir are forested areas and waterfalls. Eagles nest on the top of power poles. Deer frequently come into view. Overly warm, murky green water fills the artificial lake. When the dams go down, the accumulated silt will wash downstream and the old riverbed will come alive again. Replanting the newly exposed lake bottom will happen too. 15 miles upstream, the next dam is the J.C. Boyle. A giant fish ladder zigzags down the front of the dam. Fish ladders may satisfy some regulators, but they did nothing to prevent the complete collapse of fish populations, no longer able to get upstream to spawn. Green algae covers ponds and riverbanks. The J.C. Boyle Dam diverts most of the Klamath River away from its natural bed again, flowing into a pipe. That feeds another huge open concrete culvert that snakes its way along the side of the mountains until it reaches a hillside tunnel. From the tunnel, it flows into two large pipes that go down to the generators. The depleted river comes back to its full capacity when it joins the outflow from the generators. Electric power flows up the hill, and the river flows down, carrying with it the overheated, polluted waters coming out of the pipes, concrete channels, and reservoirs. The J.C. Boyle Dam backs up the Klamath River in a broad, slow-moving channel for miles upstream. At the Highway 66 crossing of the river, cattle graze on its banks. In my 2009 visit to this spot, I saw no cattle. The banks and river reflect the impact of cattle grazing. Plants along the riverbank are gone, and algae increasingly dominates the water's surface. The J.C. Boyle is the last dam scheduled to be removed, but it is not the last dam on the river. Upstream a few more miles, the Keno Dam is scheduled to remain. A wetlands area below the dam contains grinding holes still visible in the rocks used in pre-dam times by the Klamath tribes to grind grains and seeds. The Favel Museum in Klamath Falls, built on the site of the Iwana fishing village, found many of these metates in the ground during construction and mortared them into the museum's walls as decorations. With no power plant, the Keno Dam is designed to regulate the reservoir upstream for irrigation in the Klamath Falls area. The wide, slow-moving river backs up into Lake Iwana, a small lake in the heart of downtown Klamath Falls. Lake Iwana is all that's left of Lower Klamath Lake that was drained and converted to farmlands after World War I in the early 20th century. Tule Lake sits next to what was once Lower Klamath Lake. Parts of it remain today as the Tule Lake National Wildlife Refuge. It was also the location of the Tule Lake Segregation Center concentration camp where Japanese Americans were interred during World War II. The refuge remains under ecological and economic pressures from the surrounding commercial farming areas. The last dam on my journey up the Klamath River is the Link Dam, which has no power plant and is designed to maintain the water level of the upper Klamath Lake. Both the Kino and Link dams have fish ladders. The vast upper Klamath Lake is shallow, with an average depth of 6 to 9 feet, and suffers from even more severe water quality problems than the reservoirs downstream. My journey ends in Chiloquin, a small town along the Sprague River, one of many tributaries to the upper Klamath Lake. Chiloquin is the headquarters of the Klamath tribes. In 2008, a dam was removed from the Sprague River here. Klamath Tribal Chairman Donald C. Gentry explained to me his concern about water quality from surrounding farm runoff and how it might impact the eventual return of salmon. Salmon need unpolluted water flowing over rocky river bottoms as spawning areas. The Klamath River faces many challenges as the time to remove the dams grows closer. Removing 4 dams will not restore the original undammed river. Salmon can hardly be expected to return to the upper Klamath Lake, when the only pathway open to them are the bruising narrow fish ladders that flank the Kino and Link dams. Nitrogen-heavy agricultural runoff and urban pollution will not end when the dams go down. Nor will excessive water diversions onto farmlands that raise water temperature and deprive the river of flows sufficient to sustain fish populations. Finding a way to bring the river back will involve everyone, especially the people in the watershed that spans 2 states and encompass many conflicting groups. Restoring a healthy, balanced river with abundant wildlife and protected watershed lands is fundamental to our future and reveals the truth: water is life.